My name is Dennis Dokter. I'm the Smart Cities lead for Nexus, which is the University of Leeds' innovation hub. I also manage the data and insights and the innovation infrastructure, and I'm also the university's digital twin representative for the Digital Twin Consortium, where I'm the co-chair of the sustainability and the responsible AI working groups. So one of the things I want to talk about today really briefly is a method I've been working on, which is called DISCS, which is the design and integration of smarter city solutions, and really looking at how, as an innovation hub, we can use digital twins for the validation and democratization of innovation. So I won't go fully into reading out these definitions. I think I've just added them in to make clear which ones I use, and also to kind of highlight where I make the distinction. So when we move from, for instance, a prototype into a test bed, it's really a control testing environment. Whereas as you then start scaling your product towards a living lab, it becomes more real life as a situation, but it's still contained in a certain way, but less so than in the test bed. And that'll become more relevant as we move on. Similarly, towards the digital twin and the digital thread, just to make the distinction where we use it at integrated virtual representation of real world entities, and then a digital thread where it's really looking at how it's interconnected, the data is interconnected, and how we look at multiple dimensions and trying to capture those. Now, how that relates to DISCS is really looking at using a test bed for upstream and downstream technological development, making sure that we're able to have our Nexus members test and our academics test in a secured manner, where it's possible to cross-pollinate with other innovators, users, and researchers in an experimental environment. Then as we start scaling that product towards testing in a more real-life situation, it enters the living lab, so that it can be the university campus, or it can be White Rose Park, which is the business park in Leeds that we're collaborating with, where we really look at scaling that up, making it open to more unbiased users, basically more real-world situation, see whether it's still doing what it's supposed to do, and then using a digital twin in coexistence with that development to monitor that, capture all that data, and make sure that we can give feedback to our members to show, well, this is how people are using it, this is the type of feedback that we're getting, and this is how it's ready to move from the first stage to the next stage. Now, in order to do that, and mainly the reason behind it is that we want to be driven by data and insights. So really focusing on that user-centric innovation, making sure that we meet those community needs, that we can increase that adoption rate, because that's a very important thing for innovators, to make sure that there's actually a market or a need for that product, to integrate those technologies, allow for rapid prototyping and iteration, because failing fast is very important, and it showed that there's not much room for people to do that. Allow for real-world testing, that societal input that I mentioned. Similarly, really looking also at standards and regulation development. So when we're developing new ways of implementing agentic AI, or when we're looking at applying digital twins in areas that haven't been applied before, well, does it work, and how should standards and regulation be involved with that, to make sure that as a product develops, that they won't hit a brick wall as soon as it gets to basically market. Create the public awareness and democratic participation, so allowing people to engage with it already in the test bed, and then furthermore so in the living lab. You get that direct feedback, which helps with the product development, creates those feedback loops, and basically allows for an enhanced reliability and a better performance. Now, in order to make it a little bit more measurable, we'll use both the technology readiness levels as well as the societal readiness levels, because it's great if your product is working technically and it's doing what it's supposed to do, is generating the data you want it to generate. That's great. But similarly, you want to make sure that there's a societal adaptation and adoption of that product. So making sure that that innovation matches with the needs of society as it develops, and that you actually know and de-risk that whole innovation pathway. Now, what does that all look like in a single slide? And apologies if it looks a little bit messy, but it's basically demonstrating that as you move up through those different TRLs and SRLs, so technology readiness levels and societal readiness levels, where you start in a prototype phase in a digital twin sandbox, you basically move up towards that test bed, digital twin prototype, living lab, and a more functional digital twin is actually starting to gather that data that is relevant towards the situation, towards real-world implementation and digital twin systems. So where your digital twin is not just engaging on its own, but is also able to be adopted and integrated with other digital twins to create that virtual digital thread. So as you see, as your product would develop, or as your policy would develop throughout different stages, You're able to monitor that, quickly reiterate between, for instance, TRL2 and TRL3 to make sure that as you go to the next stage, you're capable of making quick changes, making sure it's adoptable, making sure it still works technically, and go through that. Now, it means that basically what you want, and apologies, my slide has gone a bit crazy here, but you'll be moving from an innovation equilibrium where these cylinders would be equal to each other, preventing a societal lag, for instance, where you'll see technically your product is working. So I'll go back to the previous one actually because it's clearer. Technically, your product would be working and you'd be around this level, for instance, TRL7, but relevant stakeholders aren't interested. There's no buy-in, which means that if you would want to go for investment, it becomes very difficult. The opposite is also possible, where there might be a very much societal need, stakeholder need for a product, but technically it might be too expensive or not possible. And you want to figure that out before you go to the next stage and you put a lot of investment or a lot of time into a product research or academic research before you move on to the next one. So what you want is to be within that kind of innovation equilibrium so that both sides kind of move up in parallel to one another. Now, that means this for the architecture that I've developed for Nexus, which means we've got our own digital twin for operational decision making and insights, which has the data from us and from the university, which informs our decision making, allows for internal simulation and modeling. So as we make decisions at the university or innovation hub, we're able to do that ourselves. Similarly, we're able to give access to that aggregated data to people developing downstream technology, so new applications, their own digital twins, etc., but also allow companies to test upstream technology or services that then generates data, which then we can relay back to them again via our own digital twin. So it allows for them to make those decisions simultaneously. Similarly, it also allows people that are developing simulation and modeling, predictive modeling technology or agentic AI to do the same on our platform. Obviously, there's some limitations. So there's the correlation causation problem. Interoperability will always be a thing that we need to look at. Can these data sources communicate with each other? Can you use them in parallel? What's the quality? Scalability. So how can you scale that and what does that mean? Measurement challenges. You're always dependent on collaboration, but as a collaboration hub, I think that's an important thing to note. And there's the risk of over iteration. So it's very, very mindful that you don't keep stuck in one of those levels before you go to next, that you're also capable of making those decisions. However, when we're looking at future implementations, you'll be able to implement, for instance, distributed ledgers, giving products their own digital fingerprint, making sure that as you go to investment, people can look at it and actually use it as a way of showing investors that it's immutable, so they can demonstrate how their product has still gone through these stages, giving them the trust in the product, and investors can see, oh, wait a minute, I can actually validate everything and see that it's based on actual data. You can start looking at enhanced autonomy with agentic AI, using that even in your product cycle to ask its questions. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? How's it moving up? What kind of, it can give you recommendations on what to change and give different function objectives. You're looking at distributed and scalable innovation ecosystems. So what we're developing in Nexus would be able to be scaled globally. It democratizes the participation because people can give live feedback and on the spot, I call it on the spot sentiment analysis in terms of how they feel about these products, and you can implement that in assessing the success. You're looking at more ethical and inclusive innovation. You're accelerating sustainable development because you'd be able to track even the different carbon outputs as you're moving forward. And it allows for real-time monitoring of your product and how it's related to the challenge. So instead of worrying about concept drift that would come in a later stage, you're actually able to deal with it as you move through your product life cycle. And then I've got obviously some references to that. And as was mentioned by Simon, please feel free to send your questions in the Slido. Thank you very much.
So Dennis, our first question for you is, on what scale does the societal readiness level function? Must it be national, or can it be regional, local, or even organizational?
Yes, that's a really good question. Actually, yes to all of the above, as it scales basically from a test bed or from a feature type, where it would be on a more organizational level that you get your input, that you develop further as you go up those different levels and get into a more real world environment, as will those societal readiness levels become more relevant. So where in a test battle will be the people that are working, for instance, in Nexus's case, in the innovation hub. Living lab, you get more to a campus/business development area where people can deliver their input. And as that scales, you get that input. Your stakeholders will remain involved, but as it becomes more market ready, you need to make sure that the people you're going to be, the users, the end users you're going to involve, are also compliant with what they actually want. And then hopefully that will lead to a more accurate representation of when you scale it to a real world, you'll be able to aggregate that data with the societal readiness levels.